You know that feeling when you check out at the grocery store, look at the receipt, and just wince at the total? We all feel inflation when our bills go up. But have you ever wondered how the government actually captures that feeling and turns it into the official number we hear on the news every single month? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the exact math, the hidden flaws, and the fascinating reality behind how we measure the true cost of living.
Okay, let's map out exactly how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll look at what the Consumer Price Index actually is. Then we'll walk through how it's calculated, dive into its, let's call them quirks, compare it against the GDP deflator, and finally, figure out how to use it to correct for inflation. Let's get right into it. All right, part one, the Consumer Price Index. Before we even try to measure inflation, we have to know what exactly we're trying to measure in the economy. Think about a bustling, old-school street market. That right there is the heart of our analysis. We aren't tracking abstract, high-level financial instruments here. We are quite literally just tracking the everyday stuff typical people buy to live their lives. And that brings us to the core definition. Officially, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is a measure of the overall cost of the goods and services bought by a typical consumer. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, crunches these numbers and reports them every single month. It's basically our main thermometer for checking the economy's cost of living temperature over time. So how does this translate to the headlines? The inflation rate is simply the percentage change in that price index from the previous period. The big takeaway here is that when the CPI goes up, a typical family has to shell out more cash just to maintain the exact same standard of living. It's essentially tracking the invisible erosion of your money's purchasing power. Moving on to part two, let's see how the mechanics of this actually work. How does the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually pull this off? Well, they track thousands of goods using 5 distinct steps. First up, they fix the basket. They survey consumers to figure out what a typical shopper buys and weight the items by importance. Step 2, they find the actual prices of those goods at a specific time. Third, they compute the total cost of that entire basket. Fourth, they pick a base year to serve as a benchmark and compute the index. And finally, step 5, they use that index number to calculate the inflation rate from the year before. Let's strip this down to a super simple economy where people only buy hot dogs and hamburgers. Imagine the BLS surveys consumers and fixes the basket at exactly 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. In 2016, hot dogs are $1, burgers are $2, so the whole basket costs $8. In 2017, prices creep up, and that identical basket now costs $14. The genius here is the fixed basket. By keeping it totally fixed at 4 dogs and 2 burgers, we completely isolate the price changes. We aren't getting thrown off by changes in how much food people are buying. Now for step 4, the base year. If we just arbitrarily pick 2016 as our base year, we divide the 2016 basket cost by itself, so $8 divided by $8, and multiply by 100. That means the index for our base year is always, mathematically, set to exactly 100. It's our starting block. So what does 2017 look like? We take that new basket cost of 14, divide it by our base year cost of 8, and multiply by 100. That gives us 175. What this actually means is that prices in 2017 are 175% of their base year level. Or, think of it this way, a basket that cost $100 in the base year now costs $175. To find the inflation rate, we just look at the percentage change. In this little example, that's a massive 75% jump from the previous year. All right, part 3. Let's talk about the problems with the CPI. Okay, that math seemed pretty clean, right? But here's the reality. The CPI is definitely not perfect. Economists widely acknowledge 3 difficult blind spots here: substitution bias, the introduction of new goods, and unmeasured quality change. Let's quickly break these down. First up, substitution bias. Prices don't all change at the exact same rate. Say, in our base year, apples are cheap, so the BLS stuffs our fixed basket full of them. But the next year, a bad harvest makes apples super expensive, while pears get cheaper. In reality, what do? You substitute. You buy more pears and fewer apples. But the CPI's fixed basket assumes you just stubbornly keep buying those expensive apples in the exact same quantities. Because it totally ignores substitution, the CPI actually overstates the true increase in your cost of living. Problem number 2, new goods. When a totally new product drops, consumers get more variety, which basically makes every dollar you have more valuable. Think back to 2001, when the iPod came out. It completely revolutionized how we listen to music, essentially making it cheaper and easier to get that specific level of economic well-being. A perfect index would reflect a drop in the cost of living there.
But a rigid fixed basket? It completely misses the massive value created by new inventions. And the third problem is unmeasured quality change. Think about it. If a product's quality drops, but the price stays exactly the same, the true value of your dollar has actually fallen. On the flip side, if this year's car model has better safety features and horsepower for the same price as last year's, your dollar's literally buying you more. The BLS absolutely tries to adjust for this, but quality is notoriously hard to measure perfectly, so these hidden gains in value often slip right through the cracks of the calculation. Part 4. The CPI versus the GDP deflator. Because of those quirks we just talked about, economists don't just put all their eggs in the CPI basket. They also rely heavily on the GDP deflator. Now, both track inflation, but they're looking at fundamentally different things. The GDP deflator measures the prices of all goods and services produced domestically within a country. But the CPI, as we know, focuses only on what consumers buy, regardless of where on earth it was made. To really see why this distinction matters, imagine a Boeing jet being sold to the U.S. Air Force. If the price of that jet skyrockets, the GDP deflator goes up because it was produced domestically. But since you and I aren't adding fighter jets to our grocery carts, the CPI doesn't even blink. Now, imagine an imported Volvo. If its price goes up, the CPI takes a hit because typical consumers buy Volvos, but the GDP deflator, completely unaffected because that car wasn't produced here. There's also a subtler difference in how they're weighted. We know the CPI uses that rigid, fixed basket of goods, which the BLS only occasionally updates. But the GDP deflator compares the prices of currently produced goods to base year prices. That means the group of goods in the GDP deflator is automatically updating itself over time as the whole economy's output shifts. It's a lot more fluid. And finally, Part 5. Correcting for inflation. So how do we actually use this in real life? When your grandparents tell you they bought their house for, say, $20,000 back in 1960, you instinctively know that 20 grand meant something vastly different back then. But how do we accurately compare those vintage salaries or prices to today's money without being totally misled by decades of inflation? We use something called indexation. It's basically a mathematical time machine. You take that old dollar amount, let's call it year T, and you multiply it by the ratio of today's price level divided by the price level in year T. The indexes we've been talking about, like the CPI, give us those price levels. This neat little formula lets us convert historical dollar figures straight into today's purchasing power, giving us an instant apples-to-apples comparison across the decades. And this exact same logic applies to your savings account. Say a bank offers you a 5% interest rate. That's the nominal interest rate. It's just telling you how fast your pile of dollars is growing. But if inflation is cruising along at 3%, well, your purchasing power isn't actually growing by 5%. To get the real interest rate, you just subtract the inflation rate from the nominal rate. So, in this scenario, your real interest rate, your actual usable gain in purchasing power, is only 2%. Let's wrap up with something to chew on. The government literally spends hundreds of millions of dollars sending people out with clipboards to check prices for the CPI. But today, independent groups are scraping millions of online prices every single day, tracking inflation in real time, and often matching the government's numbers perfectly. Does this mean it's time to ditch the clipboards and move to a purely digital approach? Or is there still irreplaceable value in that old-school, meticulous way we've been tracking the cost of living for almost a century? Just a little something to think about next time you see those inflation numbers flash across your screen. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer.